Welcome to episode number 157 of the Marine Layer podcast. Scott Servais was fired earlier this morning. The Mariners expect to name Dan Wilson as his replacement. We'll react to the news.
This show is brought to you by our friends at Pagacci's Pub 85. If you want to plan a fun night with your friends, go have a couple drinks, some food, play some games, watch some games, all that good stuff, head over there. It's an awesome spot. Really good deals, especially during happy hour. It's $3 and $4 drinks. So all of that stuff, a good night out with your friends over at Pagacci's Pub 85 in Kirkland. Before we start the show, your reminder, download these podcast episodes, leave a 5-star review if you're listening. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And check us out on social media across Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube Shorts at Marine Layer Pod.
Let's get it rolling.
The pitch from Acevedo. A drive deep to right field. Down the line. The Mariners win this game 2-1. The dream lives. They're going to the playoffs. 1-1 from Jansen. There you go. Left field. We got a tie ball game. Julio. Oh, baby, what a moment. Tie ball game at 7-7.
And we welcome you to this episode of the Marine Layer podcast, part of the Just Baseball Podcast Network. Recording here on Thursday morning, August 22nd. Scott Servais was fired earlier this morning, and it just seems, Lyle, now that Scott is out the door after another horrendous road trip, that the Mariners have found another scapegoat for their failures here in 2024.
Yeah, they have. This episode's going to be all about Scott Servais because that's why we're recording early and releasing the episode early. But let me just take 60 seconds to do this. Season's over. I'm serious when I say that. The season's over. I said it last night on Wednesday night in our reaction on social media. This is it. 1-8 road trip. You've been the second worst offense in the league, aside from the White Sox, by OPS since June the 18th. And now you have gotten your manager fired with a little over a month to play. I hope they prove me wrong. I hope somehow this lights a fire under them. I'm writing them off. They're done. Season's over.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
So Scott's the one who gets the finger pointed at him. But he's not the reason for all of this. Well, this was expected. I think we had a feeling this was coming this week if the Dodgers series did not go well. Because guess what happens when teams drastically underperform? Who always gets the blame pointed at them first? Whether or not it's their fault or not. It's always the manager. If you need an example, literally just go read our comment section for the past 2 months. And you'll see which direction people's fingers are always pointed, no matter who's screwing up and whose issue it is. It's always the manager. And I said this when we released our instant reaction across our social media channels earlier today. Usually when a team underperforms the way the Mariners have this season, there's an order of scapegoats to go. And in fact, they were the only 2 in-season firings this regime has ever made. It happened this season because of this underperformance. The first thing that goes, Lyle, is the hitting coach. Brant Brown was fired in the beginning of June. There's one. He's first on the list. Easy to fire the hitting coach. And that had 0 impact, just as everyone expected. 0 impact on the Mariners' offense. So what happens next? Well, it's always the manager. And Scott Servais got fired earlier this morning. Is this his fault? No. No, it is not his fault. Scott Servais, if we're making a list of people to blame for why the Mariners are where they are right now, Scott Servais is pretty low on the list. And yet, the Mariners make the decision that they're better off without him.
Yeah. That's how it goes. And looking back on the Brant Brown thing now, it's so stupid. They said they were going to overhaul their whole hitting philosophy this winter. They gave Brant Brown essentially 2 months of regular season games, and they're like, nope, you're done. It looks now like they half-assed their new hitting philosophy. Because again, like, you didn't give him any time. I know it was going badly, but it clearly did nothing. But anyway, this is about Scott Servais. You feel awful for him. Because most of what's gone wrong, like you said, probably isn't his fault. Was every one of his bullpen decisions perfect? Maybe not. Maybe you feel that way. I'd also remind people that most of the decisions he makes and the buttons he pushes are in lockstep with what has been discussed with the front office and what they've talked about every day, hours and hours before the game. He's just the one walking out to the mound to take the ball and hand it off to the new guy. Like, maybe he wasn't perfect in your eyes, but there are a lot of people to point blame at, I think, before Scott Servais for losing his job. And you know what? Especially firing him now, what's really going to change? I don't think much is changing here. Dan Wilson's a great dude. And I know people really like him in the organization. I don't think anything's changing here in the next 6 weeks because the coaching staff otherwise is still the same. The messaging is going to be similar. The philosophy is still the same. And there's only, again, 6 weeks to go in the season. So, yeah, it sucks. There's a lot to dissect with this, but I do feel for Scott because I think he was put in a very, very tough situation between ownership not really agreeing to spend the necessary money and necessary resources this offseason, then trickling down to the Dipoto Hollander level where you try to work with the budget you have to acquire players to make you a contender. You acquire the guys that ended up being in large part a failure because of the budgets you were already given, which then trickles down to the Scott Servais effect and, oh, well, the play on the field's bad. Let's point the finger at the manager.
Should we just roll through everyone who has more to blame for why Scott Servais got fired than Scott Servais himself? Do you want to start?
Yeah. God, it's not fun doing this because we usually like to be the positive podcast, but the last 2 weeks it's been near impossible, and on this episode it's near impossible. Let's look right at the 13 position players on this team. I'm going to say something harsh. Those 13 position players on this team should look right at themselves in the mirror because you lost your manager his job. It wasn't the pitching staff. You could point some blame to the bullpen. We know what all this revolves back to, though. The inability to have a competent offense. The position players on this team lost Scott Servais' job. Is it not that simple?
Yeah, that's certainly a part of it. You know who also had more to do with... Do you know who else has more to blame on why Scott Servais got fired than Scott Servais himself? Jerry Dipoto.
Mm-hmm.
Like it or not, when we talk about decision-making, lockstep with the front office, Jerry Dipoto is the front office. So if they use the rationale to fire Scott Servais and say, well, we didn't like his decision-making enough, is that not an indictment already on the front office itself? Jerry is the one putting the players to where Scott Servais is in the lineup Scott Servais and Jerry, by the way, have to construct every day. And the front office construct and sit there and think about all these decisions that Scott is going to make and write out this script. That is a front office thing, too, not just Scott Servais. So with all the roster construction aspects on top of that, it's absolutely feasible that Jerry is more to blame for why Scott Servais got fired than Scott Servais himself. And then lastly, and the most important one, is ownership. What it all boils down to is ownership. Because ownership for every Major League Baseball team is in charge of everything. If there's a failure on the field, if there's a failure off the field, the blame will always go to you because it is your team. 100% of the time. No matter if you saw it coming or not, the failures will always come back to you because you hire the guy who hires the guy who hires the guy who hires the guy. Always. It will always 100% be your fault. And that has nothing to do with set payroll budgets in the offseason or buying a Root Sports, which will probably go under next year. I didn't even have to mention that. Just the fact of being in charge.
Yeah.
So how do you think Scott Servais sits here and is feeling today? When looking at all of this, it's like, what am I supposed to do? If you and I were managing the Mariners this year, we also would have been fired with nothing in our control.
Mm-hmm. He's probably pissed. What do you expect? I'm sure he's pissed. You remember those comments at the winter meetings? We're doing the best we can with the hand we've been dealt is the best way to put it. I'm pretty sure is what he said. It was something right along those lines. Think he's happy with ownership right now? You think he was happy with ownership all season? He might not have outwardly said it to their face or to the media, but I'd bet almost anything he was incredibly frustrated and pissed off with the way ownership navigated things this offseason because it put him in an impossible position. Or not impossible position. You still could have won with this group, although, again, it's still not on him. But it put him in a very, very difficult position.
Think of For all the lineup construction people who think Scott sucks at constructing a lineup, let me frame it to you this way. If you haven't listened to Wednesday's episode, I would recommend you go listen to it, where Lau and I rattle off the OPSs of all 9 positions that Scott Servais writes in the lineup every single day. Lau, how exactly would you plan on writing in a lineup where every position has a 691 OPS or lower for the season? How exactly are you supposed to be like, well, I actually think this guy should be hitting third instead of this guy? And it's like, well, no. When they all can't hit, what are you supposed to do? Like, Scott can only do with what the guys that are on his roster are. That's it. What are you supposed to do? And if that's half of Scott's job, then it's just unfair, man. It's an unfair biz.
Scott didn't make the acquisitions. He is simply handed the talent and puts the lineup together, makes the bullpen decisions. I don't want to like make the manager of the Mariners' job to be less than it is. But in that sense, you don't acquire the talent. You have to manage with the talent you're handed. And Scott Servais is probably furious right now. You know how much he'd probably love to have 3 to 4 850 plus OPS bats the way the Dodgers do. Well, that's out of his control. He doesn't have a say in the payroll budget. He doesn't have a say in the moves that Dipoto and Hollander make. It's ridiculous. You know, like I promise you this, people. If Shohei was on this team, Scott Servais isn't messing around with the lineup. Every day, you would see Shohei either in the 1, 2, or 3 hole. You'd probably see Julio there too. If you had Randy, you'd have Randy there too. It'd be that simple. If you had those 3 guys, every day your lineup's in some form, Shohei, Julio, Randy. And Cal Raleigh's probably hitting 4th. But Scott Servais doesn't have that because ownership balked at the money this offseason. They didn't even come close.
Okay, there's a couple more things I want to hit on with this, and I'll let you pick what we're going to do next. What hiring Dan Wilson means and not a member of the current coaching staff or Jerry. Which one?
Let's go Dan Wilson first because that's newer news. So with the Dan Wilson hiring, right? Dan Wilson, I can look it up, what his exact role in the organization is, but he does have a role in the organization. He, he's on the broadcast sometimes and he does some of the Mariners' social stuff in those interviews with players, but he works with a lot of the catchers throughout the minor league system and sometimes with the major league team, and him and Cal Raleigh have a really good relationship. But this, to me, feels like, I'm sure to everybody it feels like this is probably just an interim hire. They needed somebody to step in and say, hey, just help us out for the next 6 weeks. In the offseason, you'll go back to your regular role. We'll find a new manager, but just step in for now. I'm assuming that's what's going on here. Again, Dan Wilson has some role with the team, but it's not on the current coaching staff.
But what I think this means in regards to the current coaching staff, it gives me the feeling that they're not exactly high on the rest of these guys that we've projected as potential managers in the future, like a Manny Acta or Christopher Negron. Because let's say Christopher Negron had the endorsement to be the Mariners manager next year, and they already had an idea of that before they fired Scott Servais, and they knew, we have a manager ready to replace him right now. Well, why didn't they name him that? I think this means there's going to be a real push to go outside of this organization for whatever coaching staff comes in next year. In summary, I don't think hiring Dan Wilson's a ringing endorsement of the rest of this Mariners coaching staff. Plain and simple. I think outside of Pete Woodworth, and you said Trent Blank before we started recording, those two, that's not exactly an endorsement of, hey, we're loving you guys. We want to have you guys around next year as well. Because this is Scott Servais' staff. And Scott Servais isn't here anymore. So he can't hire the rest of that staff. That makes me feel there is going to be some significant turnover in that coaching staff, and we're going to see a lot of new faces in that dugout next season.
I agree with all that. I think Pete Woodward's job is pretty safe unless he got hired away somewhere else, and I think if the Mariners are smart, you keep your pitching group intact, because the one thing you've done well is, one, draft and develop, especially pitchers, but at the major league level, have incredible starting pitching. Pete Woodworth has a lot to do with that. And if you hear guys talk about Pete Woodworth, they love him. So maybe that involves Trent Blank too. Maybe those are the two guys that stick around. Pete Woodworth, certainly, if they're smart, you keep around. But yeah, it doesn't, you don't get the sense that this whole coaching staff's going to be back. It looks like it could be a new group. And maybe that's obvious to some people. You say, well, you bring in a new manager, he's going to want to hire his own people. That may be the case. Mm-hmm. By this hiring, yeah, it does kind of seem that way. Because I guess if you were really interested in having Negron or Maniac to be the long-term manager, you could promote one of them now, see how they handle the final few weeks of the year, and then you can make a decision at the end of the season. But they didn't do that. They hired somebody that's not on the coaching staff to come step in. And I'm on the Mariners staff directory and their front office staff. I don't see Dan Wilson anywhere on it. So maybe his role isn't listed online, but he does have some role with the organization.
Like special assistant to the chairman, kind of something.
Yeah,
something like that.
That's what Ichiro is, but he's on the website. Dan Wilson's not, but he has some role.
Right. So I don't think that's exactly an endorsement of the coaching staff. So let's go up to the front office. Let's go to Jerry now. So I think every shield of blame has been now extinguished in front of Jerry Dipoto. This right here is it for him. His manager, his roster, his hitting coaches, his hitting philosophy, his overhauled coaching staff is now all gone for this season. So now Jerry, like the next move the Mariners would make would be him, right? Like that's going to be it at this point. So here's what I'm going to guess without any knowledge, inside information. I'm going to guess Jerry Dipoto is selling the Mariners the Mariners ownership group on what his plan will be for coaches and a new hitting philosophy and all of this stuff. Because the fact that Scott Servais and Jerry Dipoto are tied together at the hip, and they had been for most of their time working their way up through front offices and such, and for this move to come, like Jerry had to sell something to keep his job, I would imagine. Even though you and I don't think he should be fired based on some of the very good things he's done for this organization, the fact that now Scott is gone without Jerry being gone, like, A, all the protection's gone, and B, he really had to sell something to keep his job at this point.
I would assume Jerry Dipoto is here at least next year, 2025. Maybe 2026 as well.
Now, here's the thing on that, though. Would you want to keep Jerry around for just one? Like, if you were letting Jerry keep his job, 1 year, though? Like 1 year of leeway? That doesn't feel like enough.
So maybe it's 2 years. But he's going to have to prove something.
Especially for a new regime, quote unquote. You wouldn't. If Jerry Dipoto only has 1 year of leash and Jerry could be fired by this time next year, why don't you fire him now?
Because he's done a lot of really good things. And again,
he has. But 1 year to save your job with a completely new coaching staff. That for a GM, that does not feel as right. I think if you are willing to fire him in a year, you would just fire him now.
Oh, so you're saying if they bring in a new GM or a new president of baseball ops, they might want their own coaching staff, and if that happens, then whoever you hire next year, that coaching staff also gets overhauled by the new regime?
Right. That could very well be it, because Jerry's going to have to hire the new manager currently, right? And they would have, because Jerry's the president of baseball ops, they would have a new president of baseball ops if he gets canned next year. So if Jerry stays, it would be at least a couple of years. It would just be really weird for the Mariners to do that if they kept Jerry, but it's like, well, you have 1 year of leash. Because then what's the point of being like, well, we want a manager here for 6 years? What if he's not?
Okay, so let's assume it's 2 years he's given. And you know what? That 2 year timeline, you should have a pretty good sense on where Colt Emerson's at, where Felny Celestine's at, where Lazaro Montes is at. These hitting prospects that have real superstar potential that you're clearly waiting on and hoping they can, in some form, rejuvenate the offense long term. That shouldn't be their, they should be doing a lot more in between, because you can't wait around for those guys to win. But it would give you a pretty good sense of where the team's at after 2026 and where all those prospects are at in terms of the future of the organization. Because those guys come up and thrive and the team also gets back to the playoffs, then Jerry's looking a lot better. But if those guys' development gets slowed, or they come up to the big leagues and they're not succeeding, and the team's still not winning, then yeah, things may change.
Are all those prospects going to be good in 2 years? Good big leaguers? No.
No, but
no.
Colt Emerson's probably in the big leagues by the end of 2026, probably sooner than that, to be honest.
In the big leagues, but is he good?
You'll have a sense, at least some sense of what type of player he is. And some guys take longer than others, but if Colt Emerson gets to the big leagues at 21 years old and he's lighting it up, then that's going to be a pretty ringing endorsement of Jerry, I think.
I just think it's fascinating how they handle with Jerry, because ultimately, like, the stance you and I have had on Jerry has not changed. I think the good he does for this organization and the baseball part of this organization is better than the bads, which is the talent evaluation of acquiring big league hitters on this Mariners roster. And it seems like, at least right now, that the ownership group's going to give him a second chance. But if they really are going to only keep him around, even for 2 years, right? To if he's selling them on his current batch of top prospects to do it, I also don't feel like that's long enough. And then we're getting into the stretch where it's like, okay, Jerry's been here a while and we are waiting around a while for a lot of things. That all, like, as a fan, Lyle, that doesn't sit well with you if you're just being told to wait and wait and wait and wait and wait and wait for things to happen, right?
Yeah, for sure. Do you trust the group in charge to hire somebody better? And I want everybody.
No, I don't.
There's your problem. Let me say this. I'll leave it at this, because Jerry Dipoto still has his job for now. And if it was up to me, he'd keep it. For the people out there that want to see a change, be careful what you wish for. That's all I'll say. I'm going to leave it at that, because if it gets to a point where a new front office is coming, we can dive into it more. But I'll leave it at that. If you really want to see a new front office here and see Dipoto and Hollander elsewhere, be careful what you wish for. That's all I'll say. I'll leave it at that.
I have a few last things to say about Jerry, but before we get to Jerry, let's hear a word from Game Time. Guys, I know it's hard to believe in the Mariners right now. They have been just truly atrocious. But if you still do want to go out to the ballpark, there's still a few final weekends of summer for you to get out there, and you decide to do that, get out there, let Game Time help you get there. They have killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest ticket price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. The Giants are in town tomorrow, and Game Time has you covered if you're looking for tickets. That's $37 to get in on Friday, $38 on Saturday, $31 on Sunday. Also, don't forget, it's a Seattle sports doubleheader on Saturday. The Seahawks take on the Browns in their preseason finale. You can get into Lumen Field for tickets starting at $27. Get a panoramic view of your seat and toggle the all-in pricing feature so you know how much you're paying and what the view is before you buy. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code JustBaseball for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code JUSTBASEBALL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Okay, last few things on Jerry Dipoto. So he did an interview yesterday in a piece released by Ken Rosenthal. Did you like that? Did you like that he did that?
Not really, to be honest. One, I don't really know what he gained out of doing it. Now, maybe to him it seemed like he was actually trying to take some of the blame and take it off some of the other people on his staff, whether it was Scott Servais, Justin Hollander, whoever. But it didn't feel like the interview was executed all that great. And it kind of feels like he threw Scott Servais under the bus. And that, I feel like, wasn't really fair.
Yeah, so it's like, I'm responsible for this roster. This roster has not been very good. You know, blame. Where the whole organization is to blame for this. Oh, but we could definitely consider firing Scott Servais after all that. Which that stinks. Again, for two guys that have been linked together for quite a while. That just didn't come off good. And I think it ultimately comes down to, like, did you really need to do this?
Right. Like, for those who didn't read the article from Ken Rosenthal in The Athletic, that's what Jerry said when he was asked about moving on from Servais. He said, everything's on the table right now. And then he kind of said a bunch of stuff after that. But that first statement rung very loud in people's ears. Honestly, that's why I think a lot of people, us included, weren't that shocked to see Servais' firing today. Because it just seemed like writing was on the wall with that Jerry interview, with the way the team was playing. There was just a lot that kind of started to signal to the fact that this might be it. And yeah, I didn't love that interview. I don't think it's the end of the world, but I didn't love it, and I don't think it was all that fair to Scott Servais because he was thrown under the bus for, again, we'll circle back to it, a situation and a scenario that he doesn't really deserve a ton of blame for. Maybe not none, not a ton, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Do you think people are going to show up to the ballpark this weekend?
Dude, the ballpark's going to be interesting this weekend. I don't know if excited to be there is the right word, but I'm very intrigued to see what it's like. Both, I'm sure it's going to be chaos media-wise here on Friday. I'm sure Jerry's going to talk. I'm sure Dan Wilson's going to talk. I'm sure there's going to be a ton of stuff going on. I'm sure there's going to be a ton of media people out there. I'm also interested to see how fans are going to react, what type of people are in the park, if there is cheers, if there's a lot of booing, if there's just a lot of nothing. Again, if maybe the ballpark only fills up halfway this weekend because people are starting to feel like the season's over, which we said at the start of this show. We think the season's basically over at this point. Yeah, I'm going to be very interested to see what it's like this weekend. Friday, specifically.
There might be more people there on Saturday since Seahawks are also playing, and that might help. That could also just take away from it. People are like, well, if I'm spending money tonight, it's going to be at Lumen. It's not going to be at T-Mobile, and can't blame you. So, like, why? Why? I think it's just ultimately boiled down to we just watch this team, and it's just not a playoff team. No. Sold as a playoff team, and they're not.
Yeah. To paraphrase the words of our friend Big Cat, not actually our friend, but we love listening to Pardon My Take. I'm starting to think the Mariners aren't very good. He does that. He does that yearly with the Bears, where he'll hype himself up, telling himself like there's a reason to be excited this year. Or Justin Fields is going to be great, or Mitch Trubisky is going to be great, and it'll be like 2 or 3 weeks into the season, and he's like, I'm starting to think the Bears aren't very good. It's like that's what we're saying right here, right now. Yeah, this offense just ain't it. It's not, and it sucks because you're going to waste an unbelievable rotation. And I'm sure the group chat's going today. I'll say that. We haven't even put that out there yet, because guess what? You know who didn't lose Scott Servais his job? The 5 guys in this rotation. And Scott Servais, by the way, was very liked in that clubhouse. His players he really had the trust of his players, the buy-in from his players, and you could tell everybody really got along. Like that's a tightly knit clubhouse. You think people in that clubhouse are happy today about Scott Servais getting fired? I bet the answer is no. And if that rotation's looking around at why did this happen, they're probably sitting to themselves saying in that group chat, it's not us. So who's responsible for this?
Mm-mm. And you would think there'd be a little guilt as well with the guys you just can't hit.
Yeah.
That's it. Stinks. It's going to be weird. It's going to be a weird last month. I mean, this was not supposed to be this way. As Jerry told Ken Rosenthal, thought this was the most talented group we've had. I don't know if you and I said quite to the point of most talented, but
we
very
were in
good.
That boat.
Very good. We thought this could be the best team that they had.
When they traded for Jorge Polanco and traded for Gregory Santos, with, again, at the time of trading for Polanco, he had been a top 5 offensive second baseman in baseball over a 3-year stretch at the time they acquired him. We said, this is the best offseason they've had in a long time. They did a lot. They had to get a lot of new bats. They brought a lot of new people in. They got another lethal bullpen arm. We thought this was going to be a roster that was going to be really good with a rotation that was already good. We expected Julio to build on his 2023, despite obviously not doing that this year. We thought there was a lot of reason that this team was going to be good. And is it the most talented group in the Dipoto era? I don't know. Maybe you like that 2018 team better when Robbie was still here and Nelly was still here and guys like that, Kyle Seager. But since the rebuild, felt like it was going to be the most talented group on paper. We put a couple social posts about that out in January saying that we're really excited about this offense. And it all went down the drain. Yeah, all went down.
And it's unfortunately, Jerry was wrong, we were wrong, and they drastically underperformed.
Correct.
And now here we are.
Yeah.
In a listless September, in year 9 of Dipoto, like a listless, hopeless 500 late August Thursday in year 9.
I'm exhausted.
Yeah, same.
Exhausted. I'm ready
should
for the
not be this
offseason.
way. This should be the peak of this current Mariners regime. They should be peaking right now, but instead we are right back at square fucking one.
How do we get put into this life?
Well, I guess parents shouldn't have moved. They should have just stayed where they were. Stayed in New York.
Stayed in New York? Yeah, but I guess I can't
You
even
say the Mets aren't that much better. Well,
better.
They are better. It's hard to get worse.
Our parents grew up Mets fans, both of our parents, even though obviously like TJ and I didn't know each other till college. Our parents have never known each other, but both grew up in New York and grew up Mets fans. I'll tell you what about the Mets. They're far from perfect. If you go on Frank the Tank social media, you know that. But they have an owner willing to spend to try and win, who cares about the team, who really wants to win a title or multiple titles. You have a GM who is revered throughout the game. People love David Stearns. I thought he was an unbelievable hire. And you've got a team that, I know Pete Alonso's getting close to free agency here, but you've got proven guys on that team with some young stars that have come up and really played well. Mark Vientos has been awesome this year. Francisco Alvarez, that's your catcher of the future. They're not perfect. The rotation's far from perfect. But man, it's tough. It is. Yeah, like I can't wholeheartedly say, how do we get put into this life anymore? Because otherwise we wouldn't have this podcast. The two of us might not know each other. All the amazing people we've met through this podcast we wouldn't have met. But puts me through the fucking ringer. It's unreal. Like every year, it's the same old story aside from 2022.
Yeah.
I guess that's all we've got.
Yeah. Sorry, Scott.
You deserve better. Rotation deserves better. A lot of people deserve better. Fans especially. But it's not happening right now. And I hope long-term they find some way to make it better. I hope a lot of people take a long look in the mirror about this offseason. Ownership included. Are you enjoying watching the on-field product right now? You like the offense that's out there? You can fix all of this. You have the power to fix this. Do something about it. And I would like to think you'd reiterate that same message.
Yes. Please.
Yeah.
Please.
Please. We're begging. Literally begging. All right. I think that wraps up this edition of the Marine Layer Podcast. You guys know the drill. If you want to listen to the full form podcast, you can do so wherever you get your audio pods. Make sure to download the episodes, leave a 5-star review, leave a written review. It all really does help us out. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And then check us out on social media too. We're on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube Shorts at Marine Layer Pod. With this episode coming out, by the way, no normal Friday episode. We'll post our next episode Wednesday like normal, but just wanted to make sure people were clear on that. So that's TJ. I'm Lyle. As always, we thank you guys for tuning in. We'll talk to you soon.